Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on my bin of mixed red worms. It's a combination of red wigglers, European night crawlers, and Indian blue worms. Pretty common mix of three different composting worms that do live well together. And the system here, it's been in service for almost 100 days now, day 98 today. And if you're quick on the math, you'll know that 98 is divisible by 14, and it just so happens that on every 14th day interval, we've been coming in here to give them their feeding, and we kind of started to, developing a pattern. We noticed the pattern a couple times ago, and it just so happens that once again we're back here after another 14-day pause to give these little guys their next feeding. And that's not so interesting, the 14-day interval between feedings. What's really interesting though is the type of bedding that we used for these little guys. It's a big jumble of twine, all kind of thrown together and stuffed down into the bin. So let me just point the camera down, show you what we're talking about here, and we can get started. The twine is all intertwined, intermingled, interconnected, whatever the right word for that is. And as a result of that, it's not, oh geez, okay, well, that might be the last time we use this glove, but I believe it'll be adequate to get today's check-in completed. So the so the whole idea with doing that was that I got my hands over the summer. I got my hands on a big quantity of this fairly thick rope over here, twine rope. And since in the past I've already had good experience composting twine that's this size, this thin stuff that I use out in the garden and for other things around the house, that stuff I have found works just fine. So this thicker stuff though, I assumed it's all made of the same material and that would eventually break down, but it's, significantly larger in size. Kind of dry over here. Over here everything seems kind of fine. Over here it just seems like for whatever reason we kind of experienced some cavitation, allowing for a little bit more airflow into that section, and as a result of that it kind of dried out, which is interesting to see. Unintentional for sure. So now one thing we've been trying to do lately, when we started this system out, we made a very deliberate hole right down in the middle here so that we would have a place to submerge the feedings going forward. So if we were to dig here, we might still encounter a few chunks of rope, but for the most part, this section of the bin was dug out so as to give ourselves a place to feed. I can already see parts of the last feeding from 2 weeks ago. Here's a piece of banana. I did not come prepared to this check-in with a review of the last video. All I did was look at my tracking spreadsheet to get the numbers together for you guys for my little information board. So I didn't really revisit the video from last time to refresh my memory on how the check-in went and what was fed and stuff like that. So we're kind of winging it here, not necessarily following up on anything that might possibly require follow-up. So in the feeding zone, besides the banana peel that we bumped into, which is normal for it to be taking a little bit of time, the worms are definitely all over it and working it, but it's a tougher fibrous material that's going to take them a little bit of time. And as far as tough materials go, here too you can see a worm or two hanging out on the pumpkin stems, but this obviously is practically wood, so it is definitely going to take time for pumpkin stems to break down in the worm bin too, but in time everything goes. It's just a matter of the pace at which it's going to go. So let's take care of the feeding, and then we can explore other parts of the bin a little bit too. So like one thing we did not too long ago was we took my prepared bedding and we included it with the feeding down the middle, which is pretty routine, and we'll do that right now as well. But then we started wondering if the twine is serving as an adequate bedding material from the perspective of it being a carbon food source. because I guess the common sort of lingo in the worm composting world is that you've got the typical kitchen scraps, such as the stuff that we're giving them here, pieces of celery or pieces of cauliflower stem or whatever it may be, are all kind of handled from a worm bin feeding perspective as kind of the nitrogen rich food substances. And then to balance that out, you've got the more carbon rich food substances. And if you're into the regular everyday hot composting, you'll already kind of start recognizing the nitrogen carbon elements, or, well, they are elements, but there are the components, in addition to moisture and airflow, oxygen, that enable the hot composting processes to work. So in the worm bin, it's a similar sort of combination, but in this case, it helps balance out the diet that the wormies have. So let's just dress up this feeding zone with a few things here. The stuff I'm sprinkling in here is only because I thought I spotted a couple flying insects, and this is mosquito dunks, kind of ground up in my little mini blender to make it really easy for the worms. I mean, to make it I'm sorry, I kind of skipped over to why the grit that I have here, pulverized eggshell, is really small, to make it easy for the worms to ingest so that they can use it as grit in their gizzards to break down the foods they're eating. With the mosquito dunks, most people know that this stuff is normally dropped into a pond or some other sort of standing water where mosquitoes are thought to be laying their eggs and raising the next generation. And down in the worm bins, it definitely helps with the control of flying insects should they find themselves in your worm bins and making themselves at home. And for the longest time, I would always use that stuff in fluid form, but more recently I've been trying it out in this pulverized fashion, and I like sprinkling it through the seasoning shaker with the little holes in the container, so that I can kind of spread this stuff out lightly all over the place and kind of get a good amount of it all over the place throughout the bin. And that's really just it's a form of bacteria that interferes with the life cycle of the flying insect. So that's the way it works. So now another thing we were doing, and I can see some signs of it right here, was that I guess it takes me back to the whole idea of the bedding, you know, whether the twine was going to serve as a good carbon food source to balance out the kitchen scrap feedings. And since I thought that perhaps it was too slow of a process for that stuff to break down to the point where the worms can start making use of it, I figured it might be a good idea to start supplementing the existing twine bedding in here with my prepared bedding. So not only down in the feeding zone, but we're going to do a little bit of that out on the edges too. Because I want the worms cruising the entire system. I want them breaking stuff down everywhere, not just down the middle. So to try to promote that type of behavior, I've been sort of spreading the bedding, the freshly added prepared bedding, the foods out not only into the middle but out into the edges too, like this. So, let's not be stingy. Let's give them a little more. Just on some of my other systems, I've been getting the sense that perhaps I've too rapidly reached a point in the containers where I'm sensing that I'm pushing the limits on the capacity of the container. And here too, it does seem like we're bringing the level up pretty good here with what we're doing by nudging stuff to the side and adding more things. But hopefully the stuff will settle nicely and enable us to add more and more over time. Alright, so here's some more of the stuff from last time. Not too surprising that there's yet another banana peel here. This to me looks like a coffee filter that would have been at one point probably serving the function of feeding zone indicator and perhaps got so worn down that we decided it was time to promote it to feeding zone bedding supplements. So let's give this edge similar treatment as we did on the other, which is drop in some bedding, return the leftovers. Here we can deplete the remainder of the food supply. There was all kinds of stuff in here. Carrot shavings. This is that white carrot shavings. Celery, you name it. All kinds of yummy stuff for the wormies to feast on. Not to mention the coffee. And you know, I'm not sure if I dropped grit over into the other edge fed section, but if we didn't, that's all right. It's not an exact science. I don't always keep tight tabs on what I'm doing. I'm just kind of winging it, going at it from a perspective of just enjoying it, having fun, not necessarily following any sort of formal checklist or anything like that. So before we put down our feeding zone indicator to show ourselves where we fed, or at least one of the spots where we fed, let's do one other thing here. Kind of like in that whole theme of providing the worms with incentive to kind of roam the entire bin and hang out everywhere versus being confined to where the feedings have been going. Giving them some worm chow spread out all over the top surface there that they can nibble on and enjoy. And one other little upgrade, which wasn't here when we first arrived, because once we removed that plastic coated cardboard covering, we pretty much had direct access to the system. Another thing I like to do sometimes is provide my bins with some sort of a top covering, and I folded up this piece of newspaper here in such a way that I thought it might provide a little bit of additional cover, and eventually as it gets damp and broken in, the worms will start chewing on that and making use of that too as a carbon food source / bedding. So that's it for our check-in now with the 98-day-old red wiggler, well, not red wigglers, there are red wigglers, European night crawlers, and Indian blue worms in the mixed red worm bin. Once again, getting checked in on after 14 days, and I can see right there a couple flying insects. Sometimes I wonder if perhaps the flying insects are down inside this cardboard. I think I've explored that theory in the past, but never followed up much. So maybe one of these days I'll have to take a closer look. But that's it for the video, everyone. That's it for this glows too. So let me get going. Before I do though, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.